So my number two is Meet the Parents from 2000. This is a film directed by Jay Roach, starring Ben Stiller, Robert De Niro, Terry Polo, Blythe Danner, and Owen Wilson. The IMDb plot summary: male nurse Greg Fokker meets his girlfriend's parents before proposing, but her suspicious father is every date's worst nightmare. So this film is on my list mainly because there's a one scene in the film where they're all sitting down at a dinner table, and it's the way that their family. So this is Ben Stiller's fiance family. Blythe Danner and Robert De Niro play her parents, and it's a way for them to welcome him into their home. They're meeting them for the first time, serious relationship with his daughter. And it's showing how they use food as to welcome. Okay, the mom's going to make all this food. They're going to sit down, have this really nice dinner. And that is definitely something where, like we were mentioning with some of these other films, that's a way to welcome someone into your household and sort of signify that they're part of the family. And that is definitely something that, I've experienced before from both sides of that equation. But really what this movie, why I put this on my list as number two, is that it also shows how, usually, like we were saying, that you sit down at a table and it can be very comforting to sort of say a lot of different things and bond with people, but it also can heighten the awkwardness of when that's not actually working out and you don't really feel necessarily like you're fitting in. It can amplify that feeling and make things incredibly awkward, like that entire dinner scene is, which I will get into a little more later. But that, to me, I've definitely experienced that a lot too, where, your jokes don't land. You're trying to kind of fit in, but you still feel like you never can. And for some reason, doing that in a setting that's not around a dinner table doesn't feel as awkward or stick out as much. But when you're sharing a meal, I think those feelings are even more heightened of trying to fit in. And when you don't, oh man, it feels so obvious to yourself and then everyone around you, and much more different than if you're just kind of like, walking in the park or what have you. So
Yeah.
that's why this movie had to be in here. And I'll get into more of that dinner and things like that and more of the film in a bit. But I'm just curious what your thoughts are if you'd seen this movie before.
Oh yeah, I'd seen this movie before. Remember really enjoying it, laughing a lot with it. Hadn't seen it since, so it was kind of fun to go back and watch it. But yeah, I agree. I think there's something about physically and literally just being, you kind of trapped when you're at the dinner table, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
You
something
are.
about the act of like sitting and holding these like weapons, your cutlery
Yeah.
to like eat something. It's, if you like zoom out, it's kind of a weird kind of thing. You're kind of
Mm-hmm.
trapped in this thing, doing this act of eating. So there's something awkward and weird about that, to as pleasurable as it is. There's something awkward about it too. So I think it makes sense. But yeah, the movie is really fun. I mean, it obviously, doesn't age well in some ways. I still remember watching this for the first time, and the whole bit around, him being a male nurse was
Oh,
sort of
right,
such a
right.
punchline of the movie, which now is even more dated. It probably was even then, or I
Mm-hmm.
guess not so much. I remember laughing at it and I was sort of like, oh, this is not great. But the movie's super fun. It's great to see Robert De Niro in this turn. I think this movie kind of was a big kind of marker for him to kind of start a new inning, a new
Mm-hmm.
chapter in his career, and it's great. And Ben Stiller is amazing. Their chemistry is incredible. And as farcical and over the top the movie is, there's some real stuff in there too, which is why you want to stay with these characters and why this became such a successful film franchise. The one thing I will say, at least on this watch, which I had never really thought about, is that the girlfriend character is just so underwritten
Mm-hmm.
and so bad, which, I mean, I guess is sort of not the point of the movie, but I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you didn't prepare Ben Stiller at all for what was supposed to come.
Right.
Why are you still sort of, sharing glances or whatever with Owen Wilson's character? And then you sort of abandon Ben Stiller completely as the movie goes on. And then, oh, we are back together. So that love story or that relationship, which is supposed to be something, it just doesn't make any sense given how she treats him.
Mm-hmm.
So I was sort of screaming throughout this watch of like, oh, you're horrible. Like, you should be helping the person you're supposedly in love with. But I guess this is your 90s. Is it 90s? When is it from?
2000, basically 90s.
2000.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So this is sort of, yeah, I mean, this is how these movies were. So there's
Right.
that.
Yeah, I think it's her just sort of retreating back into being her parents' daughter versus her Ben Stiller's girlfriend. Like she goes back into that role where she more is siding with her parents in a lot of these situations than
Yeah.
she is her partner, which is not fair, but I think that adds to the
But
comedic
it's not done
weight
well.
of it.
That's the thing.
Oh, you
I
don't think Terry
buy
Polo does a
everything
good job?
else. It's not
Oh, okay.
done well. The performance and just the way it's written, it's just not, it's done very poorly in my mind.
Yeah, I think to your point on the De Niro, I think this is just an amazing performance by him coming right after Analyze This, which was his first kind of major comedic turn. And unfortunately, I feel these two movies, that movie and then this one too, were sort of the peak of his comedic abilities, and it goes very quickly downhill from there. And I don't think the next 10 to
No.
15 years of his career are really worth much of any. Like I think this is definitely the nadir of his entire career, is that the decade
Mhm.
after this movie. And unfortunately, I think this performance, as amazing as it is, puts him down a path where I just don't think
You're right.
is great for his career. But yeah, just getting back to that dinner scene, I think there's a lot of things in this that really exemplify those awkwardness. I mean, one is when you do go into someone else's home as a guest, there are going to be traditions, ways of doing their dinners that you're not going to know, and you're going to feel immediately outside of things. I mean, they use religion as an allegory for that a lot in this movie. He's Jewish and the family is Christian, and immediately he sits down and starts eating, and they're like, "Oh, we have to say grace, actually." So he's already made a mistake. He started because he didn't know, like, "Oh, we have to do grace." Okay. And then they put him on the spot to actually have to say it, which that's nice because it's like, okay, we're letting the guests kind of lead this, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't come from a tradition of saying grace at a Christian household. And it's just that scene, not only because he's improving this speech, is so funny. It's very funny, but it also does just show how you can feel so not connected to a family through dinner. Even visually, they do that by the rest of the family sort of holding hands in a certain way when they're saying grace versus Ben Stiller sort of putting the palms together and sort of a more comical kind of prayer, typical kind of like prayer hands. So he's immediately standing out visually from them, and he feels like he's not fitting in. He says jokes, they don't land. He starts a joke off about a vase on the mantelpiece, and it turns out, oh, that's Robert De
I
Niro's mom's
know.
ashes. And it's like, oh man, like his intentions are always so good, and yet he always, the world is sort of against him essentially. And I think that is something I've definitely felt. I have a lot of awkward, dinners, whether it's with coworkers or with, even sometimes family or friends, when things just aren't really, for some reason, aren't really gelling very well. And I think that whole entire scene from the beginning to the end of that dinner scene is just really very raw and real. Even though, yes, there are some accentuated, over the top kind of screwball comedy kind of aspects to it, like when the vase falls over and the cat pees on the ashes. Like, yeah, that's not realistic. But what I think this movie does a great job of is it balances these sort of unrealistic set pieces, but there is a raw and realness to a lot of the awkward situations that, again, I found myself in a lot. And I find too, actually, Ben Stiller to be kind of an avatar of how I feel a lot of the times where it's like you try your best, but it never works out. So you look like you messing up all over the place, and no one's giving you credit for at least trying, but things are going so wrong. Look, he was doing the best he could, other than at the end of the movie when the cat runs away and he steals or uses a fake cat and paints the cat's tail. Like that's the one moment in that movie where, okay, that is a bad thing. Like you should not have done that. Like Ben Stiller made a mistake, but through the rest of the entire film, he's just trying his best. The world's working against him and no one gives him any credit for anything. And it just sucks. And
No.
I think I've definitely felt that way a lot of times. And I think this movie really sometimes is pretty triggering for me, of like capturing those moments in my life where I've felt in that same way, especially over like a dinner table, which I think that scene is so critical to the film, and it's a memorable scene, but it also really does speak to how I feel where you don't really fit in when you're trying to share a meal.
Yeah. No, the whole movie is around that. And Ben Stiller is great. I mean, I feel like he's made a career around this kind of persona, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like somebody who's well-intentioned, well-meaning, but kind of silly and always kind of puts his foot in his mouth. And
Mm-hmm.
even the cat thing, I mean, the things he's trying to rise up to and please are just so kind of extraordinary and kind of what De Niro is expecting of him, that
Right.
I get it that he would go and do something like this, And that's why I sort of feel like I wish there was just a little bit of acknowledgement of something from his girlfriend and
Yeah.
fiance or whatever. There's absolutely nothing from that end, which is just totally unreal. And that's kind of what boils it for me a little bit. Because the rest of it, yeah, though farcical and heightened, it feels real.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it could be real. It's just then she's not a very good partner. Like she
Also
should have
that,
been.
yeah.
Yeah. And I actually, surprisingly enough, I mean, this is a movie that I saw when it first came out and was like amazing instant comedy classic. Like I watched
Yeah.
this movie a ton in college. I've actually never seen the other two, which is sort of weird. Like I love this movie
Oh,
so much. I've never seen the other two films. I mean, I know of them from like the trailers in terms of what the plot is, but I think, yeah, you're right. Like this relationship maybe shouldn't have lasted. Like
no.
he should have learned
Like,
in this throughout this film that like, okay, well, are you really like with me or not? Because it
right.
seems like you're not helping me out here at all. So if
No.
anything, he should have been
He should have
leaving her
walked
at the
out
end
at
of
the
this.
end.
Yeah, at the ending of
Exactly.
this film. Though I think the movie did that to make him feel more even isolated and alone. Because if he had her helping, then he wouldn't feel as an outsider as much as what this movie is
Yeah.
supposed to be about. A
I
complete
mean,
outsider who comes in and gets
yeah.
no respect.
No help needed, nothing, but just something, like any three-dimensional person, even though
Yeah.
they might be retreating back into their childhood and being like, your father's daughter, what have you, there would be some acknowledgement of the fact that I'm a grown-up and I'm in a relationship. Like zero.
Yeah.
It's
No,
just
that's
an underwritten character. But you're right. Like at the end, I was like, yeah, you need to leave this
yeah.
relationship.
Yeah. I'm like, this should be a sign that maybe you shouldn't be with this person because she wasn't trying to go to bat for you and help you
No.
out when all you were trying to do is do the best you can, buy the champagne to impress the parents or, go to this, try to find the cat, like step up any way that he
Right.
can to try to prove himself because they just treated him like nothing. And then you got Owen Wilson, who is amazing in this movie, by the way, as
So
the
good.
old boyfriend slash fiance, and just
Right.
how much they love him. And some of the lines that he gives are just like comedy gold. But like you're compared up against that, and you're feeling even more inadequate, which is what Ben Stiller, I think you said it well. Like that's what he made his career of in this comedy career that he had, even though he stepped away from that now. But it's of this guy who just can never measure up, and as much as he tries and tries and tries, and it's not from a point of malice or
No.
like even a Curb Your Enthusiasm, Larry David style, where yeah, Larry David is kind of a jerk and stuff doesn't work out for him. So you're like, oh, that's funny, but he kind of had it coming a little bit because he's rude and says things that even if they're true, maybe you shouldn't operate like that. Ben Stiller's trying as hard as he can to fit in, to be nice, to be liked, and it just never works out for him. And again, I've definitely been there many a time, and I think that's why, especially that dinner scene, I had to put this on the list. I've had many an awkward dinner like that. So not to the extreme, but it captures a lot of those feelings very, very well. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.